Revolver kind of got me into playing guitar more than drum. I was playing drums at the time, and I think with Revolver, I kind of wanted to, instead of being Ringo, I wanted to be George Harrison. It got me into the guitar playing thing more. I love the Beatles from the beginning when I was like a little bitty kid. Um, but Revolver was like there was something about that record, the sound of it and the tunes. Rubber Soul and Revolver recorded around the same sessions, but so there's something about Revolver that's just more rock and roll to me. And some of the guitar licks and the sounds just really even before I started playing guitar made me realize that that's what I wanted to do. And I can remember the day I got the record and what it was like to put it on at my parents' little cheap turntable, what it sounded like and everything. It was really exciting.
Cool. So you're kind of already into the Beatles, but that record got you into the guitar.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, to me that was sort of I don't know the chronology of, I don't know what year that came out, but it had been out for a while when I got it, and I was kind of like familiar with Rollover Beethoven and the when they were doing the covers, more cover stuff, and um, so to me, Revolver was just this huge leap sonically, which I didn't have the musical knowledge or to be able to really process or articulate, verbalize what it was about it. But I don't know. I mean, whatever they were doing um, whatever made them want to go down that rabbit hole, I kind of went right with them.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
resonated with me.
Yeah. That's cool. I went back and listened to it again, and it's so interesting to look at the songs that are like most of them are sitting at 2 minutes or less. And now in today's world, it's such a different world, but those are iconic songs. And we don't even think about how short they are in terms of today's standards. And I just thought that was really interesting looking back at it. But
Yeah, and they were also putting out 2 or 3 albums a year.
yeah, yeah,
So think about that.
yeah,
How
totally
much?
different
I
ball
mean,
game.
think about the short amount of the short career they had. I don't know what 7 or 8 years, and how the body of work is astounding.
Yeah, definitely. So at that point, you started to learn the guitar, I guess.
Yeah, it was. I've mentioned it to a lot of people, but it was the lick and "Got to Get You Into My Life" at about a minute and 50 seconds in, where Harrison sort of mimics he plays on the guitar, he plays the same thing the horns have been playing, da 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 da, and that was it. I was like, and I started out like a lot of people, my uh, went to the mall, and back then, you took guitar lessons, you went to like the mall or something and rented a Harmony acoustic for like $5 a month or something, and it was the strings were this high off the fretboard, and I was like, this is not making the sound of Revolver. And I think then I got a Harmony electric that they rented for me, and at some point, not that much further down the road, I got a Fender Mustang and a Vibro Champ amp, and then I was like, all right, now we're talking.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know, that changed everything.
right. Very
I wish
cool.
I still had that Mustang. It was like competition red, with red with the white racing stripes on it. It'd probably be
Oh
like
wow.
$3,000 now or something. It was like the cheapest guitar Fender made at the time.
Yeah, yeah. So did you start finding other folks you knew and playing music with them, or did you just play by yourself initially?
Initially, yeah, by myself, but I seemed to progress pretty quickly, and my stepmother at the time found a guy in our neighborhood that played guitar, and it was kind of like just not really taking it seriously, and she got me hooked up with this guy, and he taught me like House of the Rising Sun and Sympathy for the Devil and some of these simpler guitar songs. And then I picked it up pretty quick. And then like some Hendrix stuff and then he was like, "Well, man, you need to go take lessons from this guy because I can't teach you anymore." And so then I went and took lessons from a guy that um, was basically a blues player and turned me on to BB King and the Butterfield Blues Band and all sorts of stuff. And that really hooked me, took me in a completely different direction for a while, more soloing, and um, just the expressive, like BB King, like what with not that many notes, but like,
Hmm.
like all this emotion. And from there, I went and took lessons from a guy that was a jazz guitar player who really legit guitar player, and I learned to read music a little bit and a lot about theory. And so that was all compressed into 2 or 3 years. And kind of once the ball started rolling and I got to where I could play a song, it became everything. And I did start to play with other people. There were people I found in my high school, basically, not, ninth grade or something like that. I started playing with a bunch of guys and a couple different bands, and that yeah, I mean, it was like there really wasn't much else I was interested in besides music.
Yeah, yeah. And then you went to your first year of college in music school. Is that right?
I did. I started out thinking I was going to be a music major at Indiana University, who has a great music school, but they are at the time at least was not guitar players were not really considered to be. I don't know whether they didn't think we were really musicians or what, but just really wasn't geared to that at all. And I met a bunch of guys that had just graduated from the music school. I was a freshman, and they had already graduated, and I joined their band. And one of them was Kenny Aronoff, the drummer,
Yeah.
and he had just got his master's degree, and I think all of them had just gotten their master's degree. So I was this little, guy that was like 5 years younger, 6 years younger than them, and what a gift, to be around guys like that were like so much better and more knowledgeable than me. And I toured around the Midwest with those guys for like a year and a half, and learned a lot. Learned
Yeah.
that I didn't learn that I didn't that the best school for music was being on the road playing gigs. That
Right.
and so I didn't go back to music school.
Gotcha. How did you get hooked up with those guys that were older than you like that?
Um, God, I can't remember. I mean, how did I? I mean, I think what happened was I know what happened. I was I had like as a freshman in college, I met some people to play with. And so I was doing some playing around in Bloomington, Indiana. I was playing. And one of those guys heard me, or somebody else heard me and said, "You ought to try this guy. It sounds like he could work with you guys." And they were playing like, you know, Weather Report and stuff like that, and which I loved. But I was in town playing like Waylon Jennings and country, like a country band, and
Hmm.
so I don't know. I think just it's a blur. That was a long time ago, and I can't remember. I mean, I don't remember exactly how we hooked up. It seems like I sort of take it for granted because Kenny Aronoff and I have been incredible friends since then, and a part of my brain says, "Well, you just knew Kenny or something," but I didn't. That's how I met Kenny,
Right.
and it was a really fun time, man. They had a band house that was like right on the edge of campus, and I moved in with them. And it had a sign out front that said the Roach Motel, and it was a band house, and we rehearsed there and had parties there, and I was like, man, I don't want to go back to school. This is way more fun than school.
Yeah.
And I was learning stuff. I mean, nonstop from those guys.
Yeah. That's cool. Yeah, because I mean, they were working musicians and yeah, that's very cool.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Um, and so you said you just started hearing more and more music coming out of Austin, Texas, and that's kind of how you started looking towards Austin?
Yeah, I mean, literally, almost everything that I was excited about in this phase of my life was coming out of Austin. And, ever since I was in high school and got the Tres Hombres
Mhm.
and opened it up and saw that big spread of Mexican food and Mexican beer all in back when albums, when you open them up, it was a big deal. It wasn't like a CD now where you have to like put glasses on to see what's going on. It was like you open it up and there was all that Mexican food. And I was like, it's different down there. We don't have that in Kentucky.
Right.
And I kind of got, uh, I met Billy Gibbons at a show in Indianapolis and saw ZZ Top a bunch and kind of just sort of fell into the this myth, my brain created this picture of what Texas was like. And so I became kind of fascinated with Texas. But that was one thing. But musically, yeah, I was listening to Joe Ely and the Fabulous Thunderbirds and Luann Barton and the Leroy Brothers and all these things that were coming out of the Cobras, all these things that were coming out of Austin. And there was a girl that lived in Indiana that she worked at this deli, and she used to always make a bunch of sandwiches kind of on the side and bring our band this big bag of food, and which we really appreciated at the
Yeah.
time. And she moved here and invited me, and I went, and she goes, "Come on down and check it out. It's awesome." And I mean, I came down, I flew down. She picked me up at the airport, and I went to Barton Springs to go swimming, and I went to the Continental Club and heard the Cobras and Hutt's Hamburgers and heard Angela Straley with Denny Freeman and David Murray on guitar and somebody else. And I flew home, and like literally 3 days later, my Honda Civic was packed, and I drove back down to Austin, and I slept on her floor for 3 weeks,
Okay.
and got a job at the Highland Mall working at a record store. And after doing that for about 3 weeks, I got a gig with my first gig in town was Lucinda Williams, and I got that gig and I quit the record store. That was the
Yeah.
last. That was the last real job I've had. And you know, 3 weeks down here, or a month, I don't know. Just I just went out every single night and sat in with bands and met people and hung out. And a month later, I'm in a car going to the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival to play with Lucinda. And I'm in the French Quarter at a hotel with Roy Orbison and Grandmaster Flash and Richard Thompson. We're all in the same little hotel in the French Quarter, and I was like, "This feels pretty good. That
Wow.
this seems
Yeah.
like it might have been a good idea."
So, so were you keeping up? Were you in shock? I mean, that's really quick, honestly, for all that stuff to kind of to happen.
Yeah, I don't, it might have been 2 months. I don't know, but it nevertheless,
Sure.
it really was. And I played with a bunch of other people down here too. Um, I've just played with anybody that would let me play with them. I mean, it's like if you'll let me get on stage with you, I want to play. And then the kind of really a pivotal thing was Lucinda then got it. She wanted to have two guitar players, so she got Derek O'Brien, who was in the house band at Antone's, and he and I became really close friends. And he got me into Luann Barton's band, and she had just signed. She was on Atlantic, and Jerry Wexler produced her first record. And I mean, like I said, I was listening to her before I came down, and by virtue of the fact that I played with Luann, I could get into Antone's free, and so I went every single night, and that's
Wow.
where I absorbed this an amazing amount of knowledge because that was such a fruitful period in Austin music um, history. Really, I mean, there was it was like something that was happening every night. Clifford Antone was bringing in everybody who was in, all the giants of blues, that Albert Collins, Otis Rush, Jimmy Rogers, Eddie Taylor. I mean, it was one after another, and the house band would back them up. But the house band was so, all the players that formed that nucleus of Antone's, the house band were as good as you could find anywhere and knew all the songs and how to play with different artists. And I was there every night, man. I went down every night sucking it up and just hoping that Clifford would let me get up and play a song with, one song or two songs. But Lou Ann also opened up a lot of those shows. We'd play an opening set and Clifford would pay us really well. I mean, I think I made more money playing live then than I do now in Austin. I mean, the money hadn't changed, it was like from 30 years ago or whatever,
Yeah.
but it was an amazing time. It was truly, truly amazing, a wonderful. This was a small little town then, and um, Stevie Vaughan had just started to really. He had hit his first record had come out, and the second record probably came out uh, by then. By the time I started going down there a lot, and if he was in town, he'd be down there every night hanging out, and it was a community, of people, and it was just fun. I'm kind of stammering about it, but I just think I'm sure it wasn't quite as idyllic as I think when I look back on it. But it seems like every day I would just sleep till noon and either go to the music store and hang out and play a bunch of cool old guitars, or practice, or go to Barton Springs. Then at night I went to Antone's, or Sixth Street, down on Steamboat and the Black Cat Lounge. There was all kinds of stuff going on, and I would play a lot too. So play down there with a bunch of different people. It was great.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And yeah, talking about Austin those days, I think it's so interesting because, people go to LA, New York, Nashville, and so often the story is like, I went to LA and starved for the first few years or whatever. But it seems like Austin was a place, like you said, community, where it was, I don't know, and it wasn't a big city like LA or anything like that, but it's like they're glad to have you almost. It's easy to meet people, and um, I don't know,
Yeah,
it's just so
it
different
was.
than all those other types of scenes that you hear of
Yeah,
even
well, it's
back
different.
then.
It's not. It was then. It's not now. I mean,
Right.
I mean, just to give you an idea, I didn't have to pay. You didn't have to pay to park anywhere in the city.
Okay.
My rent, when I got here, I had a one-bedroom apartment on South First Street at Timber Creek Apartments, and I think it was 175 a month. And Clifford was paying us more than that to open up a show when you play a 45-minute set with Luann. So, I mean, I was living large. I didn't need anything else. I didn't have any other gas in my car and guitar strings and rent. And, you know, there was no traffic. I would go out at 10 o'clock at night from South Austin and drive up Guadalupe to Antone's at 30th or 29th in Guadalupe, and there was no traffic. There was no cars on the road. I mean, it's like 10 minutes up, 10 minutes back. And Barton Springs, you pull in the back entrance, and there might have been 10 cars there, and it was $1 to go in.
Wow.
I can't even. I mean, like I went and ate at a. I'm not going to say where I went today, but I had lunch and I had two chicken enchiladas with like about 3 bites of black beans and a little dollop of guacamole, and with a tip, it was $23,
Yeah.
and it was not a fancy restaurant. And I'm like, this is insane.
Yeah.
This is insane. I mean, you could have eaten that, for $23 back then. I mean, I'm showing my age, but the point, to your point, Los Angeles, yeah. I mean, you could go there and starve in a hurry. Here, it was. I mean, you could have starved here too, and but we just didn't feel like we needed much, and it wasn't expensive to live or to eat, and
Yeah.
it's really now it's really expensive to live and eat here.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
So, in terms of what was making up that music scene, was part of it during the 80s, a lot of those Austin groups and artists were starting to break into more of a mainstream, like you said, with Stevie Ray or something like that. I mean, because Austin had been around in the 70s as well, and
yeah, well, I mean, you know, Willie and Doug Somm and Asleep at the Wheel and some of those acts were touring nationally. But then, you know, Stevie broke, and then the Fabulous Thunderbirds really broke on MTV. The Leroy Brothers were on MTV. Um, yeah, it the thing that I remember was that it didn't matter the genre of music. Like I would see a lot of the same people at Antone's that I would see at a big boy show at Clubfoot, a punk show. You know, the everybody sort of cross pollinated and got along and supported each other. It wasn't like this sort of cliquish hierarchy of the blues bands looking down at the punk bands, looking down at the Cosmic Cowboys. I mean, it was just sort of like, and you know, you'd go to a restaurant and there'd be politicians and hippies, and nobody really thought anything about it. It was just, you know, I can remember like eating at a Mexican restaurant that was on Congress called Las Manitas, and Ann Richards would just stroll through, you know, when she was governor and say, "Hey, how y'all doing?" And everybody would just say, "Hey, Ann," and you know, it was
yeah,
just that kind of play. It was that kind of vibe. Even when Bush was president, I mean, governor, I mean, he'd come into restaurants and nobody would. I mean, it would just be like, "Hey, what's up?" You know,
just
nobody would
that
be
small
hassling
town
him. He
feel.
wouldn't. Yeah, it really was. It was quite a bit different.
Yeah. So was the locals that weren't musicians, were a lot of them, I guess, music enthusiasts, or not even necessarily?
Well, I think from the minute I got here, I realized that the people that come to hear music in Austin are different. And the things that I noticed were um, there were a lot of things. They seemed to be more educated about music, or they, in their gut, they could tell when it was real and when it was a good, what a good night was and what a not so good night was. That you could feel the audience respond when something kind of deeper or exciting happened on stage. They, I mean, people came out. You know, people live music was really important to the people in the town, and I think it still is, but more so than like where I came from in the Midwest and everything. And then the other thing is like you could play loud here. You know, I mean, you could I could play loud, and everybody dug it. And there are a lot of loud guitar players in Austin, and guitar players like to play loud. I mean, you get a certain sound to get a sound that a lot of guitar players, at least of that era, and for me now still, and a lot of people that I talk to that uh, play a similar kind of music that I do. I mean, it's like there's like a thing about that, and so you could get away with a lot of stuff, and you could play. You don't have to play cover songs. You know, it was
Mhm.
like the Midwest and everything is like if you weren't a cover band, man, good luck. And down here is like everybody doing their own thing, and blues and country and conjunto and you know whatever Doug Somm, all that stuff he started, and then Western swing, and you know it was just every, yeah. So the audiences were have always been a big part of Austin music to me.
Yeah.
Still to this day, when I play at the Saxon on Tuesday, the at least half the crowd comes a couple of times a month, at least, and they are very supportive, and it's like so that I mean, when you have that, it's like as a musician, you can the fear of like for me, my gig is sort of a sacred thing. It's only you just play. I play for tips, and it's not like people are paying $20 and you feel like you have to give them this big show. It's all
Hmm.
about the music, and so I'm able to. First of all, I'm lucky enough to play with great musicians, and we improvise a lot. I mean, it's like we'll do an hour and a half show sometimes and not play 10 songs, and it's sort of like part going to church for me, part spiritual experience, and also I learn new things on the bandstand playing in front of people with other musicians in the moment where there's no do-overs. And so the audience being willing to go there with you is that's a part of it. That's a big part of it. I mean, and you can't take that out of the equation and have and get the same result.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Very cool. And so, how did you get hooked up with Joe Ely?
Um, I was playing in Antone's and met Roscoe Beck, his bass player at the time, and Roscoe just basically said to Joe, "You need to hire this guy." And I went down and sat in with him one night at Green Hall, and it seemed like it went okay. And about 2 weeks later, my phone rang at about noon. I woke up, answered the phone, and it was his brother saying, "Do you want to go to Australia with us?" I said, "Yes, I want
Yeah.
to go to Australia with you." And he said, "Do you have a passport?" I said, "No, I've never
Uh,
been out of the United States." And so that, nowadays it's not that big of a deal, but back then it was like, whoa, you got to get a passport in 8 days or 10 days.
mm-hmm.
So we got my pictures taken. He drove to Houston and got me. We worked it out. And 2 weeks later, I'm on the beach in Australia.
Wow.
It was nuts. It was nuts. It was unbelievably cool.
I was gonna say, what an introduction to that next chapter.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
And I've heard you say you learned a lot from Joe, just kind of in how he operated his band and things.
Yeah. I learned, I mean, more from Joe than any other one person, I think, in my life. And it was just so far reaching, really. It's hard to, I don't even know where to start, but, um, first of all, he was so generous with is so supportive that he really encouraged me to step out. And so there was that. But, watching him perform every night and watching how he interacted with all of us and other people um, was really pivotal, and it taught me. I mean, I would have to tell you anecdotal stories to really emphasize what I can say that he taught me what it means to be an artist. He taught me how to think long term, how to never leave anything on the stage to give it all every night, and um, you know I just like expanding on that. For instance, I mean, if you saw any of those shows back in the day, you know that it was pretty much take no prisoners. And at the same time, we would do everything from the quietest ballads you can imagine to the most slamming rock and roll stuff. And so there's this whole thing I'm learning about called dynamics, and how the contrast between the two makes the whole show more interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you come out and do all ballads, you're bored. People fall asleep. If you come out and just slam from the word go, people get worn out. But how to pace the show, um, how to think, just stay true to yourself and not. I mean, there were times when I think he was sort of poised to become, and the record company saw him as becoming the Texas Springsteen, and he could have done things that, in the short run, may have elevated him to being on MTV or whatever the goal was at the time. I don't know, and he didn't do them. And at the time, I think a lot of us around him were kind of perplexed by it. But as time went on, it became a lot more apparent that what was going on was this thing called integrity
Mhm.
and and honesty, with who he was and what having a vision as an artist to not just take the to just stay true to yourself and then be able to get up in the morning and look yourself in the mirror and say, you know, I'm I didn't do that beer commercial or sign that
Yeah.
endorsement agreement that would have made me a ton of money. But look, but 30 years later, he's got a very, very, very fruitful career and is always just done it on his own terms and stayed true to himself. And that, um, I just have so much respect for him. And he always treated me, with the utmost respect. He took up for the band guys. If anybody, a promoter, for instance, or a club owner would slight the band in any way and sort of favor him, he would just call him out right on the spot. And but there's a thousand stories I could tell you, and one that really to me changed me. I think, and we were playing somewhere in Europe. We've been on this really hard tour. It was the middle of winter. The van had broken down, and we left it in a snowbank. Like literally, it was
Gosh.
a rental van from England, and we just left it in Norway. And
Jeez.
we had this one stretch where we got held by the Italian border guards before the EU, where you could cross
Uh-huh.
easily between countries. And we missed the most important show of the tour. So it was this long grind. And somewhere, I think it was in Germany, we showed up at this like motorcycle club or something. I don't, or something. It looked like we were in a basement. It was cold and dark, and the PA was the worst PA you can imagine. And our sound man at the time, got a soldering iron out and repaired this and that and got it going. And when it came time for the show, there were like 6 people there. And I thought, well, this is going to be over quick. And Joe went out and gave like the most intense performances or whatever you want to call it. It was like one of the most intense outings I've ever seen him give. And there were like 6 people there. And we didn't cut one song out. And he just, I mean, I'm sure part of it maybe have been frustration and anger, but the thing that stuck with me is this is what you do, man. You
Yeah.
don't phone in. And so that I've never forgotten that night. And uh, he's one of my heroes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I got
That's
to play with one of
fantastic.
my heroes. So I learned everything working in that band. So it's really very, very, very lucky to have been a part of that.
Yeah, that's so cool. It's somebody you're listening to before you came to Austin as well. And then
Absolutely, yeah,
got to have that
yeah. And
experience
then
with them.
last week I played at the ACL Hall of Fame show in the house band. We backed up the people that were on part of the Lucinda Williams, Alejandro Escovedo, which was also a full circle for me. After Lucinda being my first gig here, it was
Mhm.
this bizarre 30 years ago. Now we're back doing it again. But Lloyd Maines is the band leader for that band, and Lloyd played pedal steel with Joe before I got in the band, and a lot of the licks that pedal steel, overdriven pedal steel stuff that I do on guitar was really inspired by listening to him. So there's like all these connections, and then I moved down here and I get the gig, and it's I don't know that it didn't it does it never there's nothing it doesn't get any better
Yeah.
than that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so after that, you played on some John Mellencamp stuff. How did that come about?
Well, when I lived in Bloomington, I knew the guys. Well, Kenny Aronoff was, I played in a band with him when I was 17 and or 18. Maybe I just turned 18, and I knew those guys from Bloomington. And about 1990 ish, John, they had taken the Mellencamp. He had taken some time off, but I guess he got bored and he'd written some songs and he wanted to record them. And one of his guitar players, Larry Crane, was on vacation and could not make it, or he was doing something. And they called me out of the blue and said, "Do you want to come up and can you come up and play on some of the stuff?" And I'm like, "Yes, I can come up and play on some of your
Hmm.
stuff." And I went up and did 3 or 4 songs that ended up on his Big Daddy record, and I it went well. And shortly thereafter, Larry left the band, and they just called me and said, "Do you want to join the band?" And I said, "Yep."
Yeah.
And I did 3 years with John, and so I did two. I did that part of that Big Daddy record. Then I did 2 more full records with John, and that's when I also started working with James McMurtry. I did his first 2 records during that period. So that
Gotcha.
was a big learning curve, and the jump from nightclubs to arenas, that was a took a little getting used to, but it was again, there was a lot of incredible lessons that I learned in that period.
Yeah. So had you kept up with Kenny over that time?
Oh yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah,
So that
yeah.
yeah,
We were the
that
best of friends. We kept in touch. We were really close.
okay.
Even when well, I mean, um, even after I moved to Austin, I kept in touch with him, and and really even I still keep in touch with him, and we there was a period from in the 2000s where I was going to Nashville to play on country records a lot, and he and I would end up on the same record a couple times a year, and we've stayed in touch.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So John just likes to keep it that Indiana group. Like, is that, I mean, because that's what you got the call from. Is that kind of right? Because you were part of that group from before? Because most of John's band is originally was from Indiana, but he's always kept it out of Indiana. Is that right?
Well, yeah, he lives there. I mean, he's not going to move, and his guitar player, who's been with him forever now, is that replaced me, that came in after me. Andy York is a New York guy, so it's not like he's just wants
Okay.
Indiana guys. But I think it was just a logical. Who do we get? Well, we know Dave. He's
Gotcha.
great, and they knew me, and which is such a big part of a lot of being in the right place at the right time, or you got to be out there. At least when I was younger, you couldn't get gigs if you weren't like out all the time. You got to meet people, and I'm in the age of American Idol and The Voice and all that. Don't even people just want to kind of get on the television show and then be famous. And
Yeah. Sure.
the days of like just hustling and being out every night and playing hundreds, if not thousands, of gigs to get the experience to to you know to really know how to do that and that to develop your craft and find sort of who you are as a musician it's there's really no substitute for the experience of doing those things. I don't think.
Yeah, for sure. And so there's a couple gigs that I believe you did with John, and I was curious about. One, I'm not sure, but I know that there was this like one time songwriter supergroup, the Buzzin' Cousins, which was James McMurtry, John Mellencamp, Joe Ely, Dwight Yoakam, and John Prine. They did like one song because John did a movie somewhere around that time.
Yeah, I
Uh,
was. That was before me. That was
it
right
was before
before I
you.
got. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
I wasn't
I
sure
was
because
about
it
20.
was all those people just about that you kind of ended up working with 3 out of the 5 anyway.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
okay, gotcha. That's a deep cut song I just like stumbled upon on YouTube. They did one song and it's
yeah,
really cool. It's such a cool like songwriter super group and they only did one thing for that movie and it's
yeah.
I just think it's a bummer they didn't do an album or something, but yeah.
I have no comment.
Sure. Okay. Um
There's a lot of big personalities. A couple
well
of big
that's
personalities in that group.
sure. Another gig was the Bob Dylan 30th anniversary concert
Hmm.
that had like everybody there. Um, I love that
Uh-huh.
album, and I just wondered what that experience was like if you were able to meet many of those people. I mean, there were so many cool people there.
Well, we shared a dressing room with Stevie Wonder and Ron Wood,
Okay,
so that was sort of surreal.
sure.
Um, yeah, yeah. I mean, what do you say about that?
Right,
It was a
right.
nice. Sinead O'Connor, she kind of got booed off the stage. It was really uncomfortable.
Oh, really?
Um,
Okay.
because of the thing that she was on Saturday Night Live a couple week or like the weekend before and tore up a picture of the Pope, and
Oh,
she came out on stage, and it was just she just stood there and people were booing, and it was like, oh man, this is rough. And
yeah.
but the gig, aside from that, the gig was really great. It was really fun. um, I don't remember much about it. I think we played Like a Rolling Stone and maybe Leopard Skin Pillbox Hat.
I think that's
I don't
right.
know. They made it. There's a record. I don't even have it. I haven't heard it. I don't know. That's another thing, man. It's like I just kind of I very rarely listen to things that I've played on, or I always find that the memory is better than the actual thing after the fact in a way. Or I just like to keep moving forward.
Sure, sure. Um, then one thing I've heard you kind of say, um, I think you learned from those years. I'm not sure. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you talk about taking a 3 chord folk song and kind of making it something more. I think you said you saw John do that, but that's kind of an idea for the whole thing. Um, I just thought that was really neat how you put that. I've never heard it verbalized in such a way. Was that something that was explicitly said, or was that something you just kind of picked up on?
Well, I think that was sort of the one of the genius aspects of John was his ability to take literally these 3 chord folk songs and turn them into big rock anthems. And
Mm-hmm.
um, a lot of that was the band that came up with the parts. And so when I got there, I was expected to do that too. But none of it would have happened if he hadn't been directing the show. And that came with that could be the most fun day in the world, or it could be the worst day in the world if it wasn't going well. But if it was going well, it was like you were on the national. You were on the Atlanta Braves, and it was last night. I mean, that's what it felt like when it was really going well. When it wasn't going well, you were on the Astros. And but he was, he's very really demanding, and he works really fast, but there were like there were just really interesting ways that he would go about producing records. And if I the probably the thing I learned that I utilized the most was that, and watching him do that, watching his approach to sounds, parts, um, finding the personality of the song, and that was his genius. Really, was in producing. I think he's a very good songwriter. He's written some fabulous songs, but if you listen, like again, a lot of it goes back to the band, and especially the original band. I mean, we made good records when I was in the band, but really, his best records are like Lonesome Jubilee and Scarecrow, and that all those hooks that the band came up with. Like if you listen, da 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 da, check it
Hmm.
out. I mean, the whole arena erupts with four notes into it, and so though it's a great song, but when you can surround it with that kind of musical, those hooks and signature licks, and make records that sound as good as those records sound, it becomes something real. It elevates it to something really special. And um, he had different ways of going about it. It wouldn't be the same way every time. I mean, on the Human Wheels record, we did all sorts of crazy stuff. And whenever we wanted was more like, I was a new guy in the band. We just made this electric guitar record. Human Wheels, I mean, he didn't want to make that record. He didn't want to make Whenever We Wanted again. He wanted to do something completely different. So there are a lot more acoustic instruments on it. But the first song, I think it's the first song on the record. I can't remember. It's called When Jesus Left Birmingham. And it's a slamming electric guitar, funky thing. Well, that song, John came in with an acoustic guitar and played it for us. And I mean, just like 90% of the time that he brought a new song in, he said the setup was, guys, this is the best song I've ever written, and if you f it up, I'm going to kill every single one of you. And
Exact words.
yeah, exact words. And what that meant was, if it takes more than two or three takes, the song's going to be ruined, and you're going to be on the Astros. And so it was like, on that one, he played it for us, and he looked at me and said, "Dave, I need a lick. Grab your acoustic guitar and give me your coolest lick." And I just played this little simple down 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 down. For some reason, that's what that song sounded like to me. And so we went out. He goes, "That's cool, cool." And so played through it one time with him in the room. Made sure I had the chords. We didn't write anything out, and none of that like we do now. Like in Nashville, you write charts, and so because you're cutting so many songs, you can't. Anyway, we just you have to learn the song immediately. And so I came up with that lick, and Kenny Aronoff played bongos. I played the acoustic guitar, which included that lick, and then I played rhythm while John was singing. And John sang, Kenny played bongos, and I played acoustic guitar, and that's how that song was cut. And everything else on the song, if you go back and listen to that record now, was added later. A whole drum
Oh,
set, the bass guitar, the electric guitars, all the background vocals were all added later. But it was cut with bongos, acoustic, and John's vocal, and he kept the vocal. He wouldn't re-sing it. And so that was his way of coming at this folk song from a different angle. And I was like, man, I would not have thought of that.
yeah,
I do things like that now. I mean, I learned that from him. You know, he's he's smart like that.
yeah,
He's really got incredible intuitive sense about creating things
yeah,
out of the simple idea.
yeah. That's very cool. I know, just like I said, when you said taking the three chord folk songs to that other level, just that verbalizing of it, I was like, wow, that's, I mean, sure, that's him and his songs, but that's so much of just songwriting, in mainstream music. It's not, jazz or something. It's not about
Well, it's
technicality.
production, man. It's called producing,
Yeah.
and arranging.
Yeah.
It's without taking away from the lyric or without making the song something it's not. There are, there are people that are able to do that and get a sound. The Beatles did it. Tom Petty did it. The Byrds did it. You hear down, down, down. That two notes on an electric 12-string guitar, and it's which Bird song it is. I mean, it's just like these. Sometimes it's the simplest things. It's usually the simplest things that you know, like in Jack and Diane. Before I got. I mean,
Yeah.
I didn't play on that song, but Larry Crane came up with that thing. Down and down, down, down and
Yeah.
down and down. I mean, it's like a huge hook. I mean, it's like one note, and it sometimes that's all it takes. But you have to know how to arrange the song and play. But I know they spent a week on that song, and Mick Ronson was there helping them with it. So that was back before if you had to play it more than two or three times, it was ruined. But
Yeah.
uh, the art of producing and arranging is fascinating.
Yeah. Very cool. So I wanted to ask you about your songwriting as well. In Storyville, is that where you really first started to write? Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I wrote a little before that, and I had a song that I co-wrote with Joe Ely on one of his records, but really Storyville was more where I actually got enough degree of confidence to feel like maybe I could write a song. I had been surrounded by Lucinda Williams and Joe Ely and Butch Hancock and Jimmy Gilmore and this whole community of great songwriters that it was rather intimidating. And so Storyville was kind of an outlet for that, to try to give it a try, to start writing more and seeing what might happen.
Yeah. That's very cool. So how did you get into Nashville? Did you write there first or play there first?
I played there first,
Okay.
and I I knew a lot of people there, and um, I met a lot of people there basically through the Ely connection when we would play in town. And um, you know, when I started going up there a lot, it was like 2000 ish, and a lot of the records were really influenced by some of those Mellencamp records. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I got up there. I mean, I went up. I knew a producer named Blake Chansey who would come to Austin a lot, and he always said, "Let's do something together." And he had me come up and play on a John Anderson record that I'm trying to think of the title, but it has Atlantic City. It has like the best version of Atlantic City on it I think I've ever heard. I know that's sacrilege, but I love John Anderson. John Anderson singing Atlantic City is like powerful. Anyway, I came up and played on that record, and it went really well. And he was co-producing it with Paul Worley, and they were two of the biggest producers in Nashville at the time. They did the Dixie Chicks' first couple records, and it went really well. And they called me. Both of those guys called me to do their projects. And as soon as a new guy shows up in Nashville and the word gets out, other producers got to have that new guy, you
Mm-hmm.
know. It's like I don't know if it's still that way as much, but it was back then. And so all of a sudden I'm getting calls from everybody. And I did I would I had a the I mean I had enough background in country music to understand the genre, but I could fit into the system. I knew I learned really quick, what it took to what was different about Nashville than what I had done in the past, and I was really determined that I was going to get a get a grip on that in a hurry, and I did. And so I was different, but had respect for and understood the music that was going on. So I had a nice run. I had a good for a guy from the out of towner, as Ronnie Dunn called me once. I played on a Brooks and Dunn record. He goes, "You're pretty good for an out of towner." Um, and I had a great run. And again, that was just another incredible experience of even that long ago, 20 years ago. It was becoming more common not to have a whole band together in the studio. But in Nashville then, it was always get the whole band in there and cut the song, and then 2 or 3 takes, and you got a record. And I had to up my game and be able to turn on a dime and come up with the hook. And if the producer hated it, come up with another one that was completely different. So it was a really, really challenging, exciting time. And the players there are unbelievable. The session players there, so good.
Yeah.
I loved it. And then, and while I was there, I played on, I think it was Chris Knight's first record, and I met the producer was Frank Liddell, and he owned a publishing company called Carnival Music, and I wrote some songs with a couple of his writers during that period, and then they signed me to a publishing deal, and all of a sudden I'm writing with all these. Not only the musicians are incredible, but the writers are forget about it. The writers are incredible, and I got some cuts pretty quickly. Trisha Yearwood and Montgomery Gentry and Leanne Womack, and that was really cool. And you never knew. It was just like every day was like unless there were certain people that I would write with, and um, if it went well, you would write with them regularly. But there was always new people that they were hooking you up with, and which it was just like a blind date. And I had a blind date one day, and I show up, and it's this young guy named Chris Stapleton, and I just remember we were in this like tiny writing room. You can hear people writing their song through both sides. They're like, you just go get in there and write one. You got 2 hours or whatever. And we ended up writing 7 or 8 songs together. But I knew from the minute I met him, he was really something special. And obviously, he's
Right.
done quite well. But that was a treat. There were a lot of fun experiences like that. And I learned so much from those writers. And but at the end of the day, I wrote a lot of songs, and there really weren't many, if any, except for the ones that maybe I wrote with Stapleton, that I felt like if I did a record, I would put them on my record. I was writing for somebody else, and like a lot of things, it sort of ran its course, and I left my publishing deal. And as soon as I did, I started writing songs that I wanted to record. But I never would have gotten to that point had I not had the education and the experience and the opportunity to write with all those people that taught me so much. So
Yeah.
it's a long road.
Yeah, that's
You
very
just
cool.
keep.
So would you fly into town to write even?
I would rarely. Sometimes I would, but most of what happened is I would piggyback on my sessions and stick around for a couple of days and write. Uh, you know, I would combine the trip, but it was a time where when people still bought CDs, so record budgets were bigger,
Yeah.
and they could. It was not that big of a deal to fly somebody in from out of town, and I kept 10 guitars and 4 amps with a cartage company, and you show up at the studio and your stuff is set up.
Oh
It's like
wow.
living large, and so I would extend the trip and then write, or even sometimes, the way the sessions were, you might have a morning free, and I would go write with somebody that morning and then go to my sessions.
Okay.
And lots of after hours activity. There was the same thing here. It's like you go out and hang, man. You go out, hang with the people you play with. You run into a new producer. Hey, I heard about you. I'm going to call you. Or you see a writer and you're with another writer and he sees that you're writing with that writer. And it's like, we need to write sometime. And they follow up on it. So again, it was the same thing. You got to be in the game. And
Yeah.
it was fun. It was fun to be in it wasn't like, I feel like, oh no, I have to go do this. It was, I get to go do this.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so cool. I mean, that's like just about everything in music, publishing, writing, Nashville studio touring. That's really cool that that all came about.
Yeah.
Because that leads to next question. So you're producing a project right now.
Yeah, I'm actually on the tail end of it, and
Okay.
a guy from Virginia named Mike Burris, and we ended up writing the songs together, and I just got a bunch of. I played all the guitar on it, except I've got this great guy from Canada named Joey Landreth, a slide guitar player, who's also a great writer and singer. Um, Literally, his tracks, I got him to play on two songs, and his parts just came in, and before and after we talk, I'm going to be editing those and putting them in, and then we're almost done at that point and going to mix it.
Okay.
I like
Cool.
producing. It's I like, but I get so invested in the project that um, sometimes it kind of swallows me whole. But I like it, and I haven't done that much of it, but over the pandemic I did some, and I produced a few songs for an artist here named Bree Bagwell, and one of them was like number one at Texas regional radio last week or something. I don't know. It's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Kind of cool.
Very
Completely
cool.
different, like country stuff.
Yeah. So this is like all remote then, I guess,
This,
this current project
well,
or
it was with Bree, but on this record that I'm producing now is the first time I've been in a studio with players since March of 2020.
Oh,
And
okay.
we cut everything here at Arlen in town, and then finished it here at my home studio, which is where I spent the last 2 years basically working almost every day playing guitars for people. As soon as the studio shut down, I started getting inundated with stuff, and luckily I've been doing it here for a long time, and the beauty of the internet, you know,
Yeah.
the beauty of
Yeah.
WeTransfer and Hightail and Dropbox, that you can transfer these huge files and load them in and put all my parts on and bounce them out and transfer them back, and they sync right up.
Yeah. Yeah, that it's been around a while, but the COVID stuff really put it into high gear. All that stuff is
It really
had
did, and if for I mean, it was just I, I'm so lucky that I mean, I feel so lucky that I was able to do that and to work here, because the number one, I love it. I have all my guitars close by and amps, and I get the sounds I want to get, and very importantly, I have my espresso machine across the driveway, and it was just surreal. I couldn't go anywhere, but yet I was still be able to be really creative and working and really busy. And some parts of that I'm kind of happy to keep doing.
Yeah. So what was it like to go back in a studio full of people?
Well, there are not that many people there. I mean, it's everybody's vaccinated and
Sure.
careful. So
Sure.
I mean, it was just more than anything, it was good to see my friends
Yeah. Yeah.
and to hang out. And it was obviously really fun to play with human beings. But
Right.
I've been doing my Saxon gig since June on Tuesday nights, and that was pretty spiritual. The first getting back to that was like
Yeah.
almost made you. It was very emotional. It wasn't almost. It was very emotional to get back into that thing, and it was for the crowd too. Again, back to the Austin audience. You could feel. the joy in the room. It was like, here we're back. You know,
Yeah, yeah.
a long time to stay home.
Oh yeah. I mean, to totally scope out of it, it's like everything you were saying before is like, oh, you going out to the gigs every night, meeting different people, and it just throws a wrench in all of that whole thing of
Yeah,
live music and live studios and everything else. So yeah, it's a strange,
yeah,
unprecedented event. So glad that we're coming out of it.
me too.